At 8:42 a.m. on July 19, 1944, the air in Caen, France was a thick soup of cordite and rotting limestone. High in the scorched remains of a clock tower, Oberleutnant Klaus von Richter leaned against a stone gargoyle. He adjusted his Zeiss binoculars with the casual grace of a man at a sporting event. Below him, his hand-picked 10-man patrol moved through the Rue de la Bourcherie with predatory precision. They were veterans of the Eastern Front. They had survived the meat grinder of Stalingrad. To von Richter, the Americans across the alley were nothing more than frightened boys in oversized helmets, clutching manuals they didn't understand. In the next 40 seconds, von Richter and his entire squad would be erased from the German roll call. While the Oberleutnant signaled his men to advance, Private First Class Artie Miller was buried under a pile of rancid sawdust inside a derelict cold storage locker. He wasn't looking through a scope. He was staring at a chalk mark on a rusted iron rail. His hands, slick with a mix of machine grease and sweat, gripped a lever salvaged from a broken winch. This was not soldiering as the army taught it. This was a mechanical execution that flipped infantry doctrine on its head. It was a maneuver so brutal, so unsoldierly, that it was explicitly forbidden by the brass, who feared the political fallout of a butcher's war. Before the war, Artie Miller didn't understand the anatomy of a battlefield, but he understood the anatomy of a carcass. He was a shackle-man at the Union Stockyards in Chicago. In the sweltering heat of the hog butcher for the world, Artie spent 10 hours a day managing the overhead rail system. He knew how to harness gravity to move 300-pound slabs of meat with a single, silent tug. He understood civilian logic. Why work against the weight when you can make the weight work for you? When Artie enlisted after Pearl Harbor, the Army didn't know what to do with him. During basic training at Fort Benning, his instructors were baffled by his unorthodox approach. While other recruits practiced the classic prone shooting position, Artie was seen measuring the tension of the range's target wires and calculating the wind resistance of the pop-up dummies. They called him the Butcher, not as a compliment to his lethality, but as a slur against his lack of West Point polish. His sergeant nearly washed him out, claiming Artie thought too much like a plumber and not enough like a patriot. The Black Alley of Caen had become a graveyard for the 29th Infantry Division. Von Richter had placed a hidden MG-42 nest that turned the narrow corridor into a funnel of death. Standard reconnaissance and by-the-book flanking maneuvers had failed 3 times in 48 hours. The cost of following doctrine was written in blood. Corporal Silas Vance, 24, from rural Kentucky. He was a champion fiddler who had a hand-carved bow tucked in his rucksack. He died trying to execute a textbook suppression in advance maneuver. Private First Class Little Joey Moretti, from Philly. He carried a blurred photograph of his 6-year-old daughter. She would keep his last mud-stained letter in a shoebox for the next 60 years. Joey died 5 feet from the alley entrance, cut in half by a burst von Richter had ordered with a flick of his wrist. Captain Sterling, the company commander, was a man of a rigid temperament and polished brass. He stood 200 yards back, refusing to hear Miller's madman suggestion. "We are the United States Army, Miller," Sterling snapped. "We don't use contraptions. We use fire superiority. You'll follow the manual or I'll see you court-martialed for cowardice." Artie Miller watched from the shadows as Sterling prepared another official assault that would surely kill more boys. Miller had noticed something the West Point strategists had ignored. The alley was lined with an old industrial meat conveyor system that connected the butcher shops to the market. The iron rails were still bolted to the structural beams of the ruins. Miller saw the flaw in the German defense, a 5-degree slope in the alleyway and a gap in the overhead masonry. While Sterling studied his maps, Miller went rogue. He spent the night in the ruins, working in total silence. He didn't use a rifle. He used a 140-pound counterweight of jagged rubble, a coil of high-tension piano wire, and 10 heavy-duty steel hooks salvaged from the cold storage locker. He rigged the system to a trip lever. It wasn't a weapon, it was a mechanical circuit. He ignored the threat of a court-martial. He wasn't a soldier that night. He was a Chicago butcher setting up the morning shift. The morning air held the smell of fermented corn and wet ash. Inside the locker, the sweat soaked through Miller's uniform, making the wool scratch his neck like a noose. He watched through a crack in the door. Under Officer Meyer led the patrol, followed by Soldat Fischer and 8 others. They moved with professional arrogance, their boots clicking on the cobblestones. Distance, 22 feet. Angle, 43 degrees downward. Tension, 1,200 pounds of kinetic potential. When the lead German's boot hit the wire, hidden under a discarded Nazi banner, the world changed. Miller didn't fire. He pulled the winch lever. The action was a staccato of mechanical violence. The counterweight dropped. The piano wire sang a high, lethal note. The hooks, traveling at 60 miles per hour along the iron rail, whipped across the alley at exactly 14 inches off the ground. Clack, thud, snap. Von Richter, watching from the tower, didn't even have time to scream. In 40 seconds, the black alley went from a German stronghold to a silent abattoir. No muzzle flashes, no heroic charges, just the sound of heavy iron sliding on grease and the wet thud of 10 men who never saw the butcher coming. When the smoke cleared, not from grenades but from the dust stirred up by the trap, the American line moved forward. They found the German patrol neutralized with a surgical, terrifying efficiency. Captain Sterling looked at the hooks in the wire, then looked at Miller. He didn't offer a medal. He offered a warning. If this gets out, we're all in the stockade. Dismantle it now. The Army eventually adopted improvised trap doctrine into their secret training files, but Artie Miller was never credited. His name appears in no history books. He was an unsung hero of a war that preferred its legends to be clean and soldierly. After the surrender, Artie didn't stay for the victory parades. He went back to Chicago. He went back to the Union halls and the rail yards. He spent the rest of his life in the quiet rhythm of the stockyards, never speaking of Caen. He had cows to milk and a life to lead in a world that would never understand the cold, mechanical mercy of the butcher's trap. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories.